Hey guys, it's Kyle down here at Lunicycle. Today I'm going to show you how to fully remove and replace the motor on the Talaria XXX. It's not terribly hard. You're doing most of the steps if you ever tension your belt, but you do need to fully remove the controller first. So I'm going to go ahead and I've already removed the side panel, which is a bunch of 3mm bolts. The bash guard is also 4 3mm bolts. You're then going to remove all 4 of the controller bolts, and before you start undoing the controller, be sure your bike is off. You don't want any power going to your bike. So once you remove all 4 of the controller bolts, the controller is going to drop down like this. You do need to undo the 3 phase wires, but instead of having this just dangling here, it is much easier to just fully remove it. So just start by unplugging the little white connectors. You can then pull back the little insulating covers on all of the wires. And don't worry, all of these are labeled. So black is negative, red is positive, and then the 3 phase ones have the corresponding letter. So U, V, W, and they are all different lengths. So it's pretty easy to not mix these up. Alright, you can take your controller and set it aside. You can save all these little bolts. They are all the same, so you can mix them up. And now it's time to go ahead and loosen the motor. Some of these bolts can be very tight. You have 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. These 2 have a very hidden little spacer. This tensioner is the spacer for the bottom part. This little washer up here is the spacer for the top part. The other side has no spacers, but you really want to be careful not to lose these. So I'm going to start by loosening the 2 motor bolts on the other side. Use a decent quality 5mm. These can be very tight, and Talaria likes to use a lot of Loctite. So you may need to heat up the threads and loosen the Loctite. You don't want to strip these or you're going to be drilling them out, and this will take all day. So I'm going to go ahead and fully remove the 2 on the other side. Then we'll go ahead and loosen the tensioner on this and loosen the belt some more. And then we're just going to remove these bolts and the motor should just drop right out. Alright, I just removed the 2 motor bolts from the chain side. I'm going to go ahead and leave them on that side of the bike so I don't mix them up. Next, I'm going to loosen the 2 bolts on this side. And once they're loose, you do need to loosen up the belt tension. You have your tensioner here. I have a separate video. We'll put a link below on how to tension your belt. But you have 2 10mm nuts right here. If you just back these out, the motor will give some belt tension to you, and you can just kind of slide this belt off and pull it out of the way. Now it's time to fully remove these bolts. I'm going to remove the bottom one, and then it'll only be held on by the top one. Alright, now you only have 1 bolt holding the motor on. You do need to remove this little bracket here in order to easily get the motor out. So there's 4 bolts that hold this on, 2 on each side. Once this bracket is removed, you can now back out this final bolt. And remember, there is a spacer in between this, so don't let that go flying across the room. Go ahead and put your hand underneath the motor at this point so it doesn't drop on the ground. Alright, so we have our motor removed. We saved our little spacer. And now it's time to swap over this little pulley. It is good to have a power tool. You may need to heat this up. It is pretty tight. And just use a 17mm impact. And you should be able to pop this pulley loose. There's a washer, and then these use the same style as a Suron, so there is a little keyway which sits in this notch right here. So don't lose this, otherwise your pulley's just going to spin freely. Now there's nothing wrong with this motor, so we are just going to reinstall this one. Go ahead and put your keyway inside of this notch. Then the notch on the pulley lines up, and this should just slide right on. Alright, now it's time to reinstall the motor. You want to be sure your lower tensioner is still there, the little belt tensioner. And just go ahead and line up the lower bolt hole first. Go ahead and start installing this lower motor mount bolt. You just get this in loose. It's going to allow you to wiggle the motor around and line up these other ones. Be sure all of your wires are on top of the motor and not in between. Then we can go ahead and install the upper bolt with the spacer. Alright, with these bolts still loose, you can install the two left side motor mount bolts. And then we can go ahead and reinstall our belt and tension it. Alright, now that you've got all four motor mounts back in place, it's time to reinstall the belt onto the motor pulley. Should just slide into place. Now we can begin tensioning this. You turn these two nuts clockwise to tighten the belt. You want 3 to 6 millimeters of play when you wiggle the belt with your fingers. There we go. The belt's nice and snug. You can tighten down the second nut, and that's going to keep anything from coming loose. It's then time to tighten down all four of the motor mount bolts. Get these nice and tight without stripping them. So use a decent tool. Alright, we can now reinstall this little frame bracket. And reinstall our controller. Notice it's easiest to start with the 3-phase wires. So just be sure you have W to W. Red to positive. And black to negative. Go ahead and just snug all these wires down. You don't want these crazy tight or you can damage them. So just snug. Go ahead and reinstall your little insulation boots. Alright, now it's time to plug back in our controller. We have the one that comes off the motor going to here. You have the two that are coming off the harness going to the other two connectors. And then there's always an unused one. This is used for programming. And we're not going to show you the full controller reinstall. But you would then just mount the 4 controller bolts after you tuck all the wires up. And then just be sure to go through and double check all your bolts. including these side panel ones, which are easy to forget. Now, once you're done, you will need to calibrate the motor or match the controller to the motor. I'll put a link in the description with that video, and that pairs the controller to the new motor. So that's the motor swap on the Talaria XXX. It's not as bad as it looks. It is just a lot of steps.